They thought Darius Cole was only a delivery driver in a rain-soaked uniform. 3 dojo fighters blocked the alley, mocked his silence, and demanded he kneel before entering their gym. Their instructor laughed as cameras started recording, certain the humiliation would make them famous. But when one bully grabbed Darius from behind, the driver moved with terrifying precision. No wasted motion, no anger, no fear. Then a retired Marine colonel stepped through the crowd, stared at the scar beneath Darius's collar, and whispered the name nobody there understood. Ghost. Suddenly, the entire dojo realized they had cornered the wrong man. Stay until the reveal, because Ghost's victory was not defeating them. It was choosing what kind of man to become. Harbor Ridge, Virginia sat under a cold late-season rain that morning, the kind that soaked through canvas and made every delivery route feel longer than it was. Darius Cole started his shift before sunrise at Whitmore Logistics, moving through the warehouse with the quiet efficiency of a man who never needed to check the same box twice. He wore a faded uniform, checked every package by hand, and memorized entire routes without glancing at a map twice. His coworkers had noticed small things about him over the months, things that didn't quite add up for an ordinary driver. He always sat facing the door. He could pick out a single unfamiliar sound in a warehouse full of forklifts and radios. He never let anyone approach from behind without turning first, and he scanned every exit the second he walked into a building, calm in a way that felt earned rather than natural. Darius never bragged about any of it. When people asked about his past, he only said he used to work for the government and left it there, and most people learned not to push. Elena Whitmore, the woman who owned the company, considered him the most reliable driver on her payroll. In 6 months, he had never missed a delivery window, never argued with a customer, and often quietly helped coworkers untangle difficult routes without asking for credit. She had tried more than once to promote him into a coordinator role with better pay and better hours, and every time he turned it down. He told her he only needed a quiet job, a predictable schedule, and enough space to rebuild a life that had gone sideways somewhere behind him. In the break room, Darius kept a small metal box tucked inside his bag. Inside it sat an old military identification card, a Marine Corps insignia worn smooth at the edges, a unit coin engraved with the word Ghost, and a photograph that had been cut down until almost nothing of the background remained. Whenever he looked at that photograph, something in his eyes shifted, the usual stillness replaced by something closer to grief, mixed with guilt he never spoke about. That morning, Elena handed him a special assignment, a delivery to a place called Iron Dominion Dojo, the most talked-about gym in the city. The order included training equipment worth $18,000 and required a signature directly from the owner, a man named Grant Maddox. A coworker warned Darius before he left that Iron Dominion had a reputation problem. The fighters there liked to film themselves challenging delivery drivers, janitors, and random strangers off the street, chasing views instead of respect. Darius only zipped his jacket and said that if they signed for the package, he would be gone before anyone noticed him at all. He climbed into the truck, checked his mirrors out of habit rather than necessity, and pulled the manifest from the passenger seat to confirm the delivery address one final time before starting the engine. Elena watched him drive off from the loading dock and felt a small flicker of unease. She couldn't quite name the kind of instinct that came from years of managing people and learning to trust the quiet ones most. She told herself it was nothing that Darius had handled far more difficult customers than a gym full of amateur fighters looking for attention online. Still, she made a note to check the tracking system once the delivery window opened, a habit she rarely bothered with, for drivers she trusted as completely as she trusted him. The scene closed on his truck, pulling up outside the dojo in the rain, while 3 fighters inside spotted him through the fogged glass and immediately reached for their phones to start recording. Iron Dominion had stopped being a traditional gym a long time ago. Grant Maddox had turned it into an entertainment brand built on shock value, posting videos with titles designed to provoke outrage and clicks in equal measure. Professional fighters against delivery workers, strangers pressured into the cage, inexperienced people mocked in front of a crowd, and staged surprise challenges meant to promote the dojo's name across every platform that would carry it. Grant insisted the videos were harmless entertainment, but several former targets had already accused him of coercion, humiliation, and thinly veiled threats if they refused to cooperate on camera. Travis Keene was the dojo's biggest name, a fighter preparing for a regional tournament and fully convinced he was destined to become champion. Sponsors had already started reaching out, drawn by the attention his highlight videos generated online, and Grant made sure everyone at the dojo understood that Travis was the future of the brand, the fighter whose face would eventually appear on posters across the state. That kind of attention had a way of hollowing a person out from the inside, feeding an ego that needed constant proof of its own dominance to feel steady. Brock Vance played the enforcer, using his size to intimidate anyone who looked like an easy target, a role he seemed to relish more with every video that racked up views. Wade Mercer, the youngest of the group, laughed along with the crowd, mostly because he wanted Grant's approval more than he wanted trouble, still young enough to believe that belonging mattered more than being right. When Darius walked in with his uniform soaked through and his shoes worn at the heels, Travis dismissed him on sight. Darius politely asked for someone with authority to sign, and Travis deliberately ignored the request, asking instead if Darius understood whose gym he was standing in among real fighters. Darius didn't rise to the bait. He simply reminded them the equipment needed inspection within 10 minutes, and his flat refusal to engage only made Travis feel more insulted, as though a black delivery driver were somehow looking down on him by staying calm. Grant saw an opportunity for content and quietly told a staff member to start filming, then told Travis to teach the delivery man a lesson in respect. Travis planted a foot on top of the package, refused to sign, and demanded Darius bow before he'd be allowed to bring the equipment any further into the training area. Darius studied Travis for a few seconds, then calmly reached for his phone to log a refused delivery with the customer. Grant, unwilling to lose either the equipment or his footage, signaled for Brock to lock the front door. Darius noticed the exit was blocked, but he didn't panic. In a matter of seconds, he had already mapped the distance between the three fighters, the position of the camera, the emergency exit behind him, the slick mats damp from tracked-in rain, and a metal equipment rack that hadn't been properly secured to the wall. None of them realized he had read the entire room before anyone said another word. Travis stepped closer and shoved Darius's shoulder. Darius didn't move. Travis shoved harder the second time, and still Darius held his ground, and Grant leaned toward the camera and said it looked like the delivery man needed a reminder that he was standing in front of real fighters. Darius refused to take part in any challenge and asked them to either sign for the package or let him carry it back to the truck. Grant pretended to agree, but said the transfer had to go through the back door because the main floor was being filmed, and Darius understood it might be a trap, but his hand truck was still with Brock, so he followed them into the alley behind the building. The alley was empty of witnesses, except for a single dojo camera, aimed at the outdoor training pad, and Grant stood near the door, with a few members still recording. Rain continued to fall in a thin, steady drizzle, pooling in the low spots of the cracked pavement and soaking through the seams of Darius's jacket, though he never once shifted his weight or reached to wipe the water from his face. Travis demanded Darius put on gloves for one round, and Darius refused again, his voice never rising above the same even tone he had used since walking through the front door. Brock blocked the way back inside. Wade dragged the hand truck out of reach, and Travis kept escalating, insulting the uniform, the job, and the calm silence Darius refused to break, implying that his stillness was really fear, wearing a disguise. Darius answered only that calm wasn't the same as fear, that sometimes it was the last choice a person made before things turned ugly for everyone involved. Grant laughed and called it a threat, then ordered Travis to make Darius kneel and apologize on camera. Travis shoved Darius into the brick wall with his shoulder, and still Darius didn't strike back, giving them a first warning that they were now holding someone against his will. Travis mocked the warning outright, so Darius gave a second one, reminding them that the delivery truck's dash camera had already captured everything up to that point. Grant told Brock to take the phone out of Darius's hand, and as Brock stepped forward, Darius shifted back exactly one measured pace, a small motion that made Wade start to feel uneasy because it wasn't the movement of a frightened man. It was the movement of someone choosing better ground. Travis threw a fake punch close to Darius's face to see if he would flinch, and Darius didn't even blink, which only enraged Travis further, and he threw a real one. Darius tilted his head just enough that the punch cracked into the brick wall instead, and for a moment the entire alley went silent. Grant immediately declared that Darius had agreed to fight simply by dodging, hoping to twist the encounter into something that looked like a sanctioned challenge on camera. Darius calmly repeated that he had never agreed to anything but Travis, kept pressing forward, throwing 2 more punches in quick succession, both of which Darius avoided, without retaliating, moving with a fluidity that made it look like he already knew where each strike was headed before it landed. Wade noticed that Darius's eyes weren't tracking Travis's fists at all. He was watching the shoulders, the hips, the shifting center of gravity, reading the whole body instead of the hands, and Travis's composure started to crack under the pressure of hitting nothing but air. Brock began circling around to get behind Darius, and without turning his head, Darius warned him plainly not to touch him from behind. Brock smiled and reached to lock an arm around his neck, and the instant that arm made contact with his shoulder, something in Darius switched on, and his eyes lost every trace of the patient delivery driver who had walked in 20 minutes earlier, replaced by the cold focus of a man who had survived places most people never wanted to hear about. Brock's arm barely closed around Darius's neck before Darius dropped his center of gravity, pivoted, and broke the hold entirely. He never struck Brock. He simply used Brock's own momentum to put him flat on the rubber mat, and Travis lunged in immediately only for Darius to redirect his wrist and change angle just enough to send him crashing into a fence without any serious injury. Wade threw both hands up and stepped back, wanting no part of what was happening, and the entire sequence took no more than 3 seconds from start to finish. There was no wasted motion, no shouting, no visible anger, and Darius immediately created distance and told them to stop, hoping the confrontation had finally ended. Grant panicked because his footage was turning into a humiliation for the dojo instead of a promotion for it, and instead of stopping the camera, he shouted that Darius had assaulted his fighters. He ordered Travis back onto his feet to continue, and Travis, humiliated in front of dozens of future viewers, refused to accept that a delivery driver had just outmaneuvered him without landing a single blow. He tore off his gloves and announced he would fight for real this time. And Darius warned him that martial arts were never meant to patch over a man's wounded pride. The comment only made Travis angrier, and he charged in with a hard kick, which Darius sidestepped briefly, trapping the leg before setting him down on the ground, rather than breaking the joint, because Darius always stopped short of real damage. Wade began to realize the most unsettling part wasn't that Darius could beat them. It was that he clearly knew the exact amount of force required not to ruin them permanently. And Grant secretly told a staff member to call the police and report that an aggressive delivery man was attacking the dojo. Darius overheard the call from a distance and understood the story could easily be twisted if the footage was cut the wrong way, so he asked Grant directly for the full, unedited recording. Grant refused, warning Darius he was about to lose his job, get arrested, and face a lawsuit on top of it. Darius answered only that he had lived long enough to know the truth, never needed to shout it, only needed to outlast the lie. At almost the same moment, Elena noticed the delivery truck's tracker had been stationary too long at one address, and the rear doors were flagged open with an emergency signal triggered. She tried calling Darius and got no answer, so she got in her car and drove straight to the dojo herself. Back in the alley, Travis climbed to his feet a third time and demanded a fair match inside the actual cage. And Darius refused again, saying, a fight born from wounded pride was never fair to begin with. Grant threatened to release the edited footage that made Darius look like the aggressor, and Darius looked directly into the camera and stated plainly that they had blocked the door, taken his phone, and struck first. Grant ordered the recording stopped, but Wade quietly kept his own phone rolling behind his back, capturing everything Grant thought had been erased. The scene closed with police sirens rising at the end of the street, while Grant smiled, certain his influence and reputation in Harbor Ridge would guarantee that Darius, not his fighters, would be the one led away in handcuffs. Two officers arrived at the scene, and Grant immediately played the victim, claiming Darius had lost control after being asked to leave the property. Travis and Brock backed up every word of it without hesitation. Darius didn't resist when he was told to turn around, calmly explaining that multiple cameras had recorded the entire encounter and asking the officers to review every angle before drawing conclusions. Grant handed over only the clip that began the moment Brock hit the mat, conveniently leaving out the part where Darius had been cornered and struck first. One officer stayed neutral, but the other quickly leaned toward treating Darius as the instigator, since three men were telling the exact same story in near identical words. Darius was handcuffed outside the dojo, while Grant turned the camera back on framing the moment as proof his gym had subdued a dangerous man. The fighters laughed at his soaked uniform, and Travis told the camera that street skills could never stand up to real martial arts training. Darius said nothing, staring down at his restrained hands and quietly remembering a different moment from years earlier when he had let himself be taken so that others in his unit could get out safely. Back then, the cost of his silence had been measured in miles and hours, a calculated trade that saved lives. Standing outside Iron Dominion, the cost felt different, heavier somehow, because this time the lie being told about him wasn't a tactic. It was simply cruelty dressed up as content for people who would never know the difference. A small crowd had gathered by then, drawn by the flashing lights, and the sight of a man in handcuffs outside a gym known for its viral videos. Some pulled out their own phones, and for a moment it seemed as though the entire encounter might disappear into 100 different versions of the same lie, each one slightly more distorted than the last. Darius kept his eyes forward, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him rattled, holding on to the same discipline that had carried him through far worse situations than a wet sidewalk and a false accusation. Elena arrived moments later demanding answers, and Grant told her Darius had damaged the company's reputation and needed to be fired immediately. Elena wasn't ready to take Grant's word for it. In 6 months, Darius had never shown a single sign of violence, and she pulled up the dash camera footage from his truck, which captured audio of Grant and his fighters, mocking, threatening, and luring Darius into the alley in the first place. The angle unfortunately didn't show the entire space behind the building, so Elena asked the officers to hold off until another angle could be found. Grant mocked her for defending what he called a dangerous employee, out of fear of a lawsuit, and right as the argument peaked, a black sedan pulled up outside the dojo, and a man named Nathaniel Brooks stepped out onto the wet pavement. Nathaniel had come to Harbor Ridge for a veterans fundraiser nearby, and when he saw the crowd gathered outside Iron Dominion, he recognized Darius from a distance immediately. As Darius turned his head, his collar shifted just enough to reveal a long scar and a faded unit tattoo underneath, and Nathaniel froze in place at the sight of it. He pushed through the onlookers, looked down at the handcuffs, and asked who had done this to him. Grant answered that Darius was a delivery man who had assaulted his fighters, and Nathaniel stared at him as though he'd just heard something absurd. He turned back to Darius and said only one word: "Ghost." The atmosphere on that block changed instantly, and Darius closed his eyes, briefly hearing a name he had tried to bury for 7 years. Nathaniel demanded that officers check Darius's military record before reaching any conclusions, and when one of them asked why he had called Darius by that name, Nathaniel answered that when their unit had been trapped with no way out, Darius had gone into places no one else could reach and brought every one of them home. The scene closed with Grant, Travis, and Brock visibly losing their composure, while Wade's phone kept quietly recording every single word. Nathaniel confirmed that Darius had once served in an elite reconnaissance unit within the Marine Corps, a unit built around small teams sent into places larger forces couldn't safely reach. He wasn't the largest man in the group, but he was known for moving almost silently, memorizing terrain after a single pass, staying composed under extreme pressure, sensing danger before anyone around him could, and slipping in and out of hostile territory without ever being detected. Other men in the unit used to joke that Darius could walk across gravel without making a sound, that he seemed to know a room's exits before he had finished stepping through the door, a skill that had saved lives more times than anyone could count. His nickname Ghost never came from the number of people he defeated. It came from the number of people he brought home without the enemy ever realizing he had been there at all. A distinction that mattered enormously to the men who had served beside him. Nathaniel described the unit's final mission in a remote mountain region where communication had been lost after the operation collapsed and their route out was sealed off. Darius had already been wounded, but refused to be evacuated alone, disappearing from their position for hours while he searched for a path through terrain that didn't exist on any map they carried. He returned, right as his fellow Marines were nearly out of strength, leading them along the new route he had mapped, marking dangerous points, and returning again and again to bring each man out one at a time. On his final trip back, he went for his closest friend, a staff sergeant named Isaiah Boone. Darius found Isaiah, but couldn't get him out in time, and Isaiah's final words told Darius to keep living and never let the rest of his life become another battlefield. Darius did manage to save Nathaniel and 7 others that day, but for years afterward, the only person he could think about was the one he hadn't been able to bring home. He was offered a medal after the mission and refused to accept it publicly, leaving the Marine Corps not long after. He carried the guilt like a weight he never set down, convinced he wasn't entitled to be called a hero by anyone. He moved from city to city, taking ordinary jobs to avoid drawing attention to himself, and delivery work gave him something simple to hold onto a task, with a clear purpose: take something, protect it, and get it exactly where it needed to. Go. Nathaniel spoke to the crowd outside the dojo and told them they believed Ghost was the name of a man skilled at hurting others. They had it backwards. It was the name of a man who always put other people's lives ahead of his own. Darius asked Nathaniel to stop. He didn't want his past turned into a tool for winning an argument. Nathaniel answered that silence was a noble quality, but silence in the face of a lie only allowed that lie to be used against an innocent man. Wade finally stepped forward and admitted that Grant had staged the entire confrontation, handing his phone to the officers. The footage showed Brock locking the door, Travis striking first, Grant ordering the fight to continue when Darius tried to leave. Repeated warnings from Darius, and Darius only fighting back to protect himself, along with Grant's own instructions to edit the recording afterward. The officers removed the handcuffs from Darius's wrists. Grant immediately accused Wade of betraying the dojo, and Wade answered simply that he had only stopped betraying the truth. The scene closed with Darius rubbing his wrists, looking at Grant without a trace of triumph in his expression, saying only that this wasn't over, because the dojo had done the same thing to plenty of other people before him. Once Wade's footage went public, the story spread through Harbor Ridge faster than anyone expected. Grant tried to protect his reputation by calling it a misunderstood performance, but former targets of the dojo began speaking out one after another. A local reporter named Jocelyn Price, who had already been investigating Iron Dominion, reached out to both Elena and Darius. She told them the gym had produced at least 14 videos showing clear signs of coercion or staging, with people threatened over their jobs if they complained, footage edited to make victims look like aggressors, forced liability waivers signed under pressure, public humiliation online, and payment demands to remove damaging clips. Grant had been profiting from every bit of it through sponsorships and advertising revenue. Elena wanted to hire a lawyer and push a lawsuit forward on Darius's behalf, but Darius insisted the case shouldn't center only on him. He could defend himself. The other victims couldn't, and many of them had already been made to feel small enough that they doubted anyone would believe their side of the story. He agreed to speak with Jocelyn on the condition that she wouldn't turn his military past into a sensational headline, wanting the story to focus instead on how the dojo had used martial arts to hunt people who never wanted to fight in the first place. Jocelyn respected the boundary and told him she had built her career on stories that held power accountable rather than ones that turned private pain into spectacle, and something in the way she said it convinced Darius he could trust her. With the details that mattered. Travis, meanwhile, began feeling the weight of consequences as sponsors pulled out and the regional tournament suspended his eligibility pending investigation. Grant convinced Travis that the only way to salvage his reputation was to challenge Darius publicly, arguing that if Darius refused, it would prove he only knew how to attack people by surprise. Travis posted a video daring Darius to step into an official sanctioned match, and Darius turned him down. Public opinion split sharply, with some accusing Darius of being afraid to fight fair, while others recognized Grant was simply trying to turn a bullying scandal into another profitable spectacle. Elena asked Darius why he wouldn't just accept the challenge and end things by beating Travis outright, and Darius explained that stepping into that cage to prove he was stronger would only hand Grant exactly the kind of show he wanted. Nathaniel agreed, telling her that Darius's real strength had always come from his ability to choose which battles were worth fighting at all. Jocelyn uncovered financial records showing Grant had used controversial videos to boost revenue, funneling the money through several promotional shell companies. Wade agreed to testify and revealed that Grant kept the original unedited footage stored on a private server. When Grant discovered Wade had been cooperating with the reporter, he threw him out of the dojo, and the other members isolated him for it, though Darius never mocked him for what he had done. Darius told Wade that doing the right thing late still mattered more than continuing to do the wrong thing on time. Travis, growing increasingly unstable, realized Grant never cared about his career, only about having a recognizable face to keep the money flowing. He found Darius at the warehouse and pushed once more for a match, and Darius refused to fight, but agreed to talk. He asked Travis why a man who claimed to be strong needed to humiliate people who had never challenged him in the first place, and Travis had no answer. Darius understood then that Travis wasn't entirely rotten, only shaped by years of Grant feeding his ego, twisting every silence into an insult, and every stranger into an enemy. Before he walked away, Darius told him he didn't need to defeat him. He needed to figure out who he was when nobody was cheering. The scene closed, with Grant announcing a live event at the dojo, promising to expose Ghost once and for all, while quietly planning to lure Darius back inside the building. Grant called the event Ghost Exposed, inviting media sponsors and fighters from around the region. He claimed he would reveal evidence proving Darius was a violent former soldier who had used his training to attack the dojo without provocation. Jocelyn learned Grant intended to wipe his server clean right after the event, and while she had already forwarded evidence to investigators, the search warrant would take time to process. Wade worried Grant would destroy everything before the police could act, and Elena discovered Grant was illegally displaying company equipment that hadn't been fully paid for, prompting her and Darius to head to the dojo to reclaim it. Darius understood it might be another trap, but he wasn't going to let Elena face Grant alone. The moment they walked in, Grant locked the door and switched on a live broadcast announcing that Darius had voluntarily shown up to accept the challenge. Darius made it clear, in front of everyone, that he had only come to retrieve company property. Grant produced a forged liability waiver bearing what looked like Darius's signature, while Jocelyn stood in the crowd recording everything on her own. Travis was ordered into the cage, and Grant threatened that if he refused to fight, he would release footage that placed the entire blame for past incidents squarely on him. Travis realized in that moment he had only ever been a tool for Grant to use. He stepped into the cage, but refused to throw a single punch, and when Grant called him a coward in front of the cameras, Travis pulled off his gloves and announced publicly that Grant had personally ordered him to provoke Darius on the day of the delivery. Grant scrambled to cut the broadcast, and Brock rushed toward the control panel to wipe the server, only for Wade to block his path, setting off a struggle between them. A heavy equipment rack was knocked loose in the chaos and began tipping toward Elena and Jocelyn. Darius reacted instantly, pushing through the crowd to shove both women clear before bracing the falling rack with his shoulder long enough for everyone to get out of the way. Travis and Wade rushed in to help steady it, and in the confusion, Grant bolted toward the server room to erase the evidence himself. Darius went after him, but never raised a hand against him, simply positioning his body between Grant and the storage equipment. The room was small and cluttered with cables and blinking lights, the hum of the servers. The only sound besides Grant's ragged breathing as he realized the walls were closing in around everything he had built. Grant grabbed a wooden training staff and demanded Darius step aside. Darius told him he had spent years filming other people's fear, and now there wasn't a single camera left that he still controlled. Grant swung the staff at him, and Darius sidestepped, locking his wrist and taking the weapon without causing serious injury. Grant kept swinging with his bare hands until his own momentum threw him off balance and sent him crashing to the floor. And moments later, Nathaniel arrived, alongside investigators carrying a search warrant. Grant was arrested on charges including unlawful confinement, assault forgery, destruction of evidence, and several financial crimes tied to the dojo's operations. As officers led him away, Grant shouted that Darius had destroyed his dojo. Darius answered that he hadn't destroyed anything, that Grant had done that himself. Every time he taught someone, that strength gave them the right to humiliate another person. The scene closed on the Iron Dominion sign being pulled off the wall while investigators sealed off the building. Weeks later, Iron Dominion shut its doors permanently, and Grant faced a wave of lawsuits from former victims coming forward one after another. Each new account adding weight to a pattern that had gone unchecked for far too long. The complete footage proved Darius had only ever acted in self-defense, and public opinion shifted entirely in his favor, with people across the city calling him a hero, a label he never seemed comfortable wearing, even when it was offered with the best intentions. Reporters staked out the warehouse for days, hoping for an interview, and strangers stopped him on his routes just to shake his hand or thank him for standing his ground. Television programs reached out asking him to appear, but he turned most of them down, unwilling to let the name Ghost become another piece of entertainment, knowing better than anyone how easily a story like his could be twisted into something it was never meant to be. Elena offered him a new position as Director of Safety and Training at Whitmore Logistics, a role built specifically to protect drivers from dangerous situations before they escalated. Darius initially refused, afraid of stepping back into any kind of leadership role after everything he had walked away from years earlier. Elena told him he didn't need to become the man who once commanded people on a battlefield, only the man who had stood between her and a falling equipment rack without a second thought. Nathaniel reminded him that choosing to keep living wasn't a betrayal of Isaiah's memory. It was exactly what Isaiah had asked of him. Travis lost his tournament eligibility, but avoided serious charges after cooperating fully with investigators and publicly accepting responsibility for what he had done. He found Darius at the warehouse again, this time without a camera or a pair of gloves anywhere in sight. He apologized for judging Darius's uniform as though it said anything true about his worth as a person. Darius accepted the apology, but made clear that it didn't erase the harm already done, telling Travis he owed the same apology to every other victim Iron Dominion had left behind. Travis asked if Darius would train him, and Darius refused to teach him how to fight, offering instead to teach him how to control a situation without needing to fight at all. Wade spent those first weeks after the arrest trying to figure out where he fit in a world that no longer had a dojo at its center, applying for jobs he didn't quite believe he deserved, and avoiding the eyes of people who recognized him from the footage. Slowly, working alongside Jocelyn gave him something to hold on to, a sense that being useful didn't require being feared or admired, only honest. Darius began hosting free safety sessions for delivery drivers, service workers, and anyone whose job left them alone and vulnerable in unfamiliar places. The sessions focused on recognizing warning signs early, maintaining safe distance, documenting evidence properly, identifying exits, calling for help at the right moment, refusing to let wounded pride turn a disagreement into violence, and only defending yourself when every other option was gone. Travis, Wade, and a handful of former fighters joined as assistants, while Wade began working with Jocelyn on an education program about ethics inside martial arts training. During one session, someone asked Darius which technique he considered the most valuable thing he had ever learned. Everyone expected an answer about a devastating lock or a hard-earned military tactic. Darius told them the most valuable thing he ever learned was knowing when he didn't need to prove anything at all. That single sentence became the quiet center of everything that followed. The scene closed with Travis watching workers dismantle the old cage, finally understanding that the most important match between him and Darius had never actually happened, because Darius had already won the moment he refused to become the man Grant wanted him to be. 6 months later, a community organization purchased the old Iron Dominion building and converted it into a vocational training center paired with a safety-focused gym. Darius agreed to lead the crisis management program housed inside it, and the first thing he did was paint a single line on the wall near the entrance. Strength protects, ego humiliates. Travis took a maintenance role and helped run fitness classes no longer treated as a star, and instead learning patience through the smallest tasks the building required. Wade managed a new transparent recording policy that ensured no one would ever be filmed or shown publicly without their consent again. Elena expanded Darius's training program across the entire company, and reports of harassment against her drivers dropped sharply within months. Jocelyn published her full investigation into Iron Dominion, honoring her promise to leave the private details of Darius's military file untouched. Nathaniel invited Darius to attend a memorial for their old unit, and for the first time in 7 years, Darius agreed to go. The memorial grounds were quiet that afternoon, rows of names etched into dark stone under a sky far calmer than the one that had hung over Harbor Ridge the day everything began. Darius brought the small metal box with him, the coin engraved with the word Ghost, resting inside its edges, worn smooth from years of being turned over in his hand during moments no one else ever witnessed. He stood in front of Isaiah Boone's name carved into the wall and admitted he had spent years trying to disappear, believing an ordinary life was the only way to escape the guilt he carried. Nathaniel told him Isaiah never asked him to disappear. He asked him to live, and there was a difference between the two that Darius had only truly understood after everything that happened outside a rain-soaked dojo months earlier. Darius rested his hand against the engraved name and said he had brought so many people home, yet it had taken him this long to realize Isaiah was the one who had finally brought him home. He didn't leave the coin behind that day. He kept it, but it no longer felt like a symbol of a past he needed to hide. In the final scene, Darius put on his new Whitmore logistics uniform and walked into the training center where a room full of grown workers waited for him to begin the session. Travis asked which lesson they should start with, and Darius looked around the room that had once been built to turn humiliation into entertainment. He told them they would start by learning to see the person in front of them before they ever saw an opponent. Someone in the back asked if that was a rule he had learned in the military, and Darius shook his head, explaining that it was a rule he had only learned afterward, in the quiet years he had spent trying to disappear. He said the hardest lesson of his life hadn't come from any battlefield at all, but from finally accepting that hiding from the world wasn't the same thing as protecting it. The room stayed silent for a moment, the kind of silence that came from people actually listening rather than waiting for their turn to speak. And then Darius nodded toward the mats and told them it was time to begin. The doors of the center opened, and daylight spilled across the floor. The man once known only as Ghost had stopped trying to vanish. He walked forward, not as a soldier people feared, but as a protector who had finally accepted that he still deserved a life of his own, one built not on the silence he used to hide behind, but on the quiet strength he had carried with him all along.